Hey everyone, and welcome back to this edition of the Linux and Open Source News Show. This week we've got Microsoft finally using their stranglehold on the PC market to do some good by trying and fix the confusion around what USB-C ports support which feature and the like. We also have GNOME OS coming to your PC as a daily drivable distro, if you like immutable stuff. And we also have AMD ditching their proprietary userspace drivers because their Mesa stuff is already really good. Plus a lot more stuff, including this segue to our sponsor. This video is sponsored by SquareSpace. It's your all-in-one platform to create, publish, and manage your website. Squarespace has really easy tools to make sure that anyone can end up with a really nice looking and well-optimized website, no matter if you know how to code or not. They have what they call their blueprint system, which lets you pick from a variety of templates that are pre-built and will suit any type of website, whether it's a simple blog, an online store, a video platform, whatever. All these templates are optimized by default to give you good SEO, but they also add some SEO-specific tools on top of that to make sure that your website just doesn't end up on the last page of Google. On top of that, to go further, Squarespace has their own design engine to create your own pages. You can just drag and drop elements where you want them, you can change all the colors, the fonts, you can just tweak the templates however you want. And once you have something you like, you can add extra features like your own online shop with a payment system, you can design your own logo from Squarespace, you can book your own domain name to have an easy to remember address. So check out squarespace.com/TheLinuxExperiment or just click the link in the description below and you'll get 10% off your first website or domain purchase. So, I can't say I like Microsoft's hold on PC manufacturers. They're forcing them to implement certain hardware features so they can get that Windows seal of approval, stuff like the stupid Copilot key or the TPM chip, but this time it looks like it's going to be for the best. Microsoft said they want to end USB-C confusion by forcing manufacturers to support at the very least a certain subset of features in all their USB-C ports if they want to keep having that certified for Windows kind of stamp. This has been a real issue. Not all USB-C ports support the same functionality. Some can charge your laptop, some can't. Some support driving displays, some don't. And Microsoft will now mandate that every USB-C port in any device that wants to ship Windows supports data, charging, and driving displays, meaning all USB-C ports in the future will have to provide the exact same feature set. And it is a great thing because it's just much simpler, much more understandable, and it will also work for us on Linux. Now that won't solve the cable problem, where certain cables can drive displays, certain can only charge, certain support data as well. You will still need to label those or put them in separate boxes, but at least for the ports of your computer, you won't have to worry which cable has to go in which port, and that's nice. Now, the level of support for these features can vary. Some ports will obviously still be able to support higher data transfer speeds, some will allow charging faster than others, and some will support higher display resolutions and frame rates, but at the very least, you know that any port on your new future computer will just work for anything you'd like to do with them, and that's a solid thing. Now that's where Microsoft can actually be really useful for people, using their strength and their power on the market to effect some good changes that make stuff better for consumers. The main problem is that generally Microsoft doesn't really think about that. They think about what's better for Windows, which is often at odds with what is better for consumers. Now, GNOME OS will soon be a real distribution that you can actually use on your own system if you so choose. It was initially created as a unified base to test development versions of GNOME. It was really only for developers, and even then it wasn't really that proficient at it. But it has since been slowly improved upon to the point that it's apparently now a usable operating system for early adopters that aren't afraid of bugs. GNOME also has a summer project to make GNOME OS cross that finish line and bring it into a daily drivable state. And they released a little FAQ to explain a few things about GNOME OS, notably the fact that it uses systemd sysupdate, which is a new systemd service that doesn't support Delta updates yet, meaning you need a good unmetered connection to use it because you'll have to download a lot of data with each update. There's also the fact that it's Flatpak only. Anything that isn't a Flatpak will need to be built as a system extension with systemd sysxt, which is a similar take on the OS3 type of system to layer packages on top of your system. They also have a little challenge for everyone who would like to help over the summer. They have a point system. Daily driving GNOME OS for 4 weeks at least nets you 10 points, and then you get points for filing issues, for merge requests that actually get accepted, and for fixing issues as well. The person with the most points in early September will get a smartphone, which is a OnePlus 6 with post-market OS running on it, and the top 3 testers and developers with the most points will also get a shirt. Not necessarily insane prizes, but if you want to help the GNOME OS project and you want to test it out, it might be something to look forward to. At some point, I'm sure GNOME OS will have its users, although it is another one of those immutable distros. I'm putting this in air quotes because it is a pretty bad term. They aren't unchangeable. You can modify them as you like. It's just another way of changing stuff on your system. But I'm also sure that this is not everyone's cup of tea, and so I don't think this is going to become the definitive GNOME OS. It does give a platform to test GNOME as it was intended to be used by their developers without any extras or changes, which is still pretty interesting. Now, AMD is ditching the userspace components of their proprietary driver. For a long while, AMD has not only supported the open source Mesa drivers, directly contributing to them in a lot of cases, to handle OpenGL and also Vulkan, but they also published their own proprietary package that you could install, with proprietary implementations of an OpenGL and a Vulkan driver. The latter being based off of the open source AMD VLK driver, which is not the one that Mesa uses, which is the RADV driver. Well, these are all going away now, as the open source options are now just really great, and they support everything that they should. So starting with the next version of their proprietary drivers, they'll just rely on Mesa instead, meaning the proprietary drivers included in the Radeon software package will mostly just be useful for OpenCL implementations that might not be complete in Mesa. And even that gap is getting shorter and shorter as the Rust-based implementation of OpenCL is catching up really quickly with the proprietary implementations. So basically now you never have to worry on whether you need the proprietary drivers. If you're wondering, then no, you don't. And if you need them, you absolutely know that this is what you need, so this clears up some confusion as well. It also looks like the collaboration between Valve and Arch Linux is going pretty well, where Valve is contracting some developers on Arch Linux to implement certain features. It's what they call sponsored work. And it seems to be going well because they have actually laid out a process for other potential sponsors to pay developers to work on the Arch Linux stack. There was currently no specific process for that, and as with all big projects like Arch, standardizing stuff is pretty good. So they've established a process to let sponsors, sponsor some development and to let Arch Linux contributors meet that demand. Their goals are really solid. They want to stay transparent first and foremost, letting people know which sponsorships exist, who's paying for what part of Arch Linux to be worked on, and what that entails. They also want to prevent conflicts of interest, and they want to avoid agreements that are deemed problematic by contributors. As always, it's a community-based project, so you want to avoid the stuff that really irks people, like what we've seen in NixOS, where some of their conventions were sponsored by arms dealers or military-industrial complex firms. This really created a big blowout. Arch probably wants to avoid that kind of stuff and has an open discussion process to know which sponsors are okay and which are not okay by the community standards. Now, Arch now has an email address to let sponsors reach out to the project, and then each sponsorship will be discussed on a case-by-case basis by the Arch Linux staff, and all the major sponsorships that affect Arch's priorities will be announced publicly. There's a separate process for individuals accepting sponsorships on their own, making it clear that they are individuals, they don't represent the Arch Linux project, and these sponsorships will need to be mentioned in the source code's README file. All publications related to that work will also have to be marked as sponsored as well, so the public knows that someone paid for that code to be written. And just to be clear, I'm not talking about sponsors as in this guy sponsored this video on this channel. I'm talking about companies or individuals approaching Arch Linux saying, hey, we'd like to use Arch for our project, but we need this feature or that feature. Would you be willing to work on that in exchange for some money? That's sponsored work. And it all looks above board. It's very transparent. It's very clear whether it's an individual developer tackling something or if it's the Arch project itself agreeing to the sponsorship. It looks nice, and I think it makes sense to have a strong process for that kind of work to happen, so everyone is informed and everything is very clear and legible. Canonical is finally dropping Bazaar, the version control system that they mostly developed themselves and that they used for Ubuntu, their PPAs, and on their launchpad platform for years. Bazaar released at a time where Git was not as prevalent. Basically, Git and Bazaar released almost simultaneously, if I remember correctly, and at that time, version control systems were clearly not as efficient. So Bazaar was a pretty good stuff. The problem is everyone decided to just go with Git. It is the default tool that you use for version control. It is part of virtually every developer's skill set and repertoire, so Bazaar is now being abandoned. It apparently required a lot of resources and effort to keep it running, notably on the infrastructure side of things, and these resources, as always, could be better used elsewhere. Canonical also said that Bazaar was not very popular anymore. Most of its use was apparently because people kind of had to. For example, setting up a PPA was just really easier with Bazaar, and it was a real head scratcher with anything else. So very soon the web front end to browse code managed with Bazaar will shut down, but code will still be able to be pulled, pushed, and merged. But in early September, Bazaar code hosting will be entirely removed and users will need to migrate to other systems. We don't yet know if Ubuntu itself will migrate off of Bazaar because apparently their build process is still very much linked to that version control system, so maybe Canonical will keep using it internally, but it won't be offered as a service on Launchpad at the very least. I don't think Bazaar was extremely popular to begin with. I never really achieved the same kind of widespread use and popularity as Git did, and offering it on Launchpad just didn't really make sense anymore for Ubuntu, for Canonical, and also it's open source, so if you still want to use it, you can still host it somewhere for yourself and just run with that thing. Now let's talk about privacy, because while the EU is trying to break down the grip of Apple and Google on their app stores and on their ecosystems, well, these companies are not going down without a fight, especially Apple, who appealed a recent EU ruling that forced them to open up to the competition. Notably, they had to let other actors interoperate with their major services and with all of their hardware features. That's the Digital Markets Act that has been passed in the EU. Apple thinks that this will stifle innovation, which of course it won't, because it will force more competition, because if any competitor has to have the same access to the system and hardware that Apple does, then they have better products, which also challenges Apple to make better stuff. More innovations, that is very clear. They'll just have to compete on features and quality instead of competing on arbitrarily locking down certain features for themselves. They also said that this will be a privacy problem because data-hungry companies could now access user info, which again, that's not how things work. The OS still has a bunch of reasonable protections around that data collection, and laws exist in the EU to oppose that kind of stuff as well. So of course this is all complete BS from Apple to try and stall the process. It could take years to solve, but at the very least Apple does have to comply with the order in the meantime, so it means Apple devices will have to work with rival makers of smartphones, headphones, VR devices, but also app developers that will have the same level of access to APIs and to the OS that Apple has themselves. It is a net positive to have this interoperability. I don't care how many people try to spin this as this is going to be a security problem. It won't if it's developed properly. It's not on other systems when it's developed properly, and it just means the competition is level, the playing field is the same for everyone, and Apple can't just charge extra money for made-for-something programs or just reserve certain features for themselves. Of course, the Apple ecosystem works better when you integrate certain Apple products with certain Apple services. That's because no one else can have the same access to the hardware and the software. If everyone could, Apple products would not be better than the competition, or at least they could be, but they would have to be on features and build quality, which currently they're not. Now, as privacy laws tend to get more and more stringent, at least against various companies, these companies tend to get more creative to try and still manage to track users. And that's what Meta and Yandex are doing now, as Facebook, Instagram, Yandex Maps, and the Yandex browser seem to now stay open on Android in the background and to listen on fixed local ports to track users. These applications can receive all the cookies, commands, and metadata from the tracking scripts from Meta or Yandex that tons of websites use to display ads. Any website that relies on Yandex's ad network or Meta's ad network will have a little tracking script on their website to know who's visiting what and what should be displayed to them. These scripts send some data, and it also executes, of course, some JavaScript. This JavaScript now sends every information that they've got to the native Android app on your phone from Meta or Yandex, where they can easily link all your web browsing data to your account, which fully de-anonymizes any visit that you make online. Basically, a JS script transfers the first-party cookie from Meta to the native app for Facebook or Instagram using WebRTC and UDP ports. So any other application that is listening in on these ports could also potentially grab the information, not just the Facebook ones. Yandex does the same thing but uses TCP ports instead. Saturday morning, Nick here for a quick update. This practice has now been stopped. Meta stopped doing it. They removed all the code. The script doesn't pass anything anymore through localhost. It's just stopped. Yandex stopped as well. So it looks like they only wanted to do it while no one really knew this existed. But as soon as they were found out, they decided it was probably better legally to just stop doing it. Doesn't excuse the practice, and we'll have to make sure that they don't do it again, because it is horrible. And finally, on the gaming side of things, Linux's market share on Steam is finally rising again, hitting a nice big 2.69% of the entire Steam using population. Now, this market share fluctuates quite a bit month to month. The Chinese population isn't always counted the same, or maybe they rally en masse behind certain games that manage to be published in China on Steam while the rest aren't. And this population just uses Windows and nothing else. So from time to time, Windows' market share gets about 1% bigger, and then it goes back down and it makes Linux grow again. But looking at overall trends, Linux's market share is rising, slowly but surely. And it's also rising much faster since the release of the Steam Deck. I would expect the release of other devices running SteamOS and the favorable reviews that they seem to be getting to help this market share grow even faster. Linux is already a much more popular gaming OS than macOS, and I wouldn't be surprised if we reached about 5% of the entire Steam market share in a few years, at least if more SteamOS devices arrive into the hands of consumers. Now, we'll have to see how it goes. More SteamOS devices and users doesn't necessarily mean more Linux desktop users. That transition isn't immediate and very logical either. I discussed it on the patroncast for Patreon supporters and YouTube members. Go check that out in the description if you want. That's it for my shilling. But it is still very, very nice to see SteamOS grow. It is nice to see Linux grow as a gaming platform. And this still might be our foot in the door to try and become more well-known, more popular, and maybe remove a few myths around Linux that people might still have in their heads. But if you do want a Linux device, well, we have our sponsor, Tuxedo Computers. Tuxedo makes laptops and desktops that run Linux out of the box. You can buy them with Windows if you want, but why would you when the computer is made specifically to run Linux? Everything is fully supported under Linux, that's kind of the point, and they have a big range of devices that will fit all price points and all needs, from the smallest, slimmest laptop to the most high-end workstation or gaming PC. They have it all. I only use their computers these days. Everything that you see or hear from me is made on one of their laptops, the Infinity Book Pro 16, and all my gaming is done on one of their desktops, the Tuxedo Cube, running Nobara as a sort of big gaming console. If you need a new computer, you want to run Linux, you want to make sure that what you buy supports Linux perfectly, click the link in the description and get yourself a Tuxedo PC. They're really, really good. Anyway, this will conclude today's episode. I hope you enjoyed listening to it. As always, you know what the YouTube buttons do and why you should click them. You also have links in the descriptions to become a supporter of the channel or to help it grow. You know how all of this works. Thank you all for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!